Alhamdulillah. Okay, I chose to stand over here behind the podium because I'm going to talk about Sukkuk. Some of you look angry, some of you look hungry, probably you are. Some of you may even be angry, so I'm going to stand behind this thing. Sukkuk has now become one of those topics that, you have to wonder, just where people are coming from. The IFSB, we're talking about, our homegrown Islamic financial regulatory and bodies. So one is the IFSB, the Islamic Financial Services Board. It's basically an organization that pulls central banks together, regulators, and from not only from the Muslim world but around the world. I think they have membership of over 100 institutions. And basically they serve as an ambassador to explain what Islamic finance is and how it operates to bank regulators and securities commissions around the world. They held a conference back in 2005 in London. It may have been 2006. In any case, at the time, the subject was Sukkuk and insolvency. And it was a very interesting conference, well attended. We had some brilliant minds there, legal minds, Shariah business. But finally, everyone had to confess that, everything we're talking about here today is really speculation, because at that time, nothing had gone to the courts. At that time, all of the Sukkuk, and there weren't very many, but nonetheless, they were all functioning quite well, and the forecast was pretty good. Lo and behold, the black swan comes along and things change. So now, it's only now, the last couple of years, that we've begun to see Sukkuk brought under the legal microscope in courts around the world. And it's interesting to see just the whole process and where this is leading. It's very difficult to know where it's leading, but certainly there are questions and more questions and more questions as we progress. One of the big questions, of course, is how, and of course I'm speaking from an investor's perspective, is how different jurisdictions are going to treat insolvency cases regarding Sukkuk. We don't know how different jurisdictions are going to rule until the cases are brought to them. An interesting one at present, it's winding down. I checked with legal counsel a couple of days ago about just how much I could talk about this case. It's the East Cameron Partnership, ECP Sukkuk, the first Sukkuk based on U.S. assets. That one went south last year, 2 years ago, really. There was a default, and it is now with the courts in the state of Louisiana. And those of you familiar with the legal system here in the United States know that we are 50 states, and each state has its own kind of has its own ways of dealing with the law. The laws in Louisiana, owing to its historical connection to France, are heavily influenced by the Napoleonic Code and are therefore, depending on your perspective, problematic, or some might call it a quagmire. It depends how you look at it. So that particular case is being adjudicated over there. And it will be interesting to see how it turns out. My understanding is, again, I can't say much about it because I was a part of that deal originally, but it looks like everyone is being satisfied, at least as best as possible. But some interesting points will indeed come out of that case, and I'm hoping actually to co-author a paper on some of the findings with legal counsel. But one of the things here, with regard to Sukkuk, one of the topics that's in the air nowadays is the question of ownership. And we've seen a lot of comments in the press and some back and forth between different parties about how Sharia scholars, for example, really need to understand how important ownership is, and they dropped the ball on some of these sukkuk. In some of these cases, maybe they have not been as diligent as they needed to be. But I'd like to point some things out. The Sharia board, when it looks at a sukkuk or at any instrument in Islamic finance, our concern is, with regard to ownership, is with the legal indicia. What are the signs? The adillah. What is it that lets us know that yes, in fact, we can establish ownership? That there's possession. There are different signs of which indicate the fact that there's ownership. For example, the recent situation came up with gold securities, certificates of ownership of gold, and it was pointed out that the Sharia board had approved these certificates when, in fact, the small investor, the ma and pa investor like you and me, well, maybe not like you, like me, wants to redeem a half an ounce of gold, and they're told, and thinking that he or she is actually the owner. They have the certificate to prove it, and the Sharia board backed the certificate and said, yes, in fact, you have ownership. So why can't they go to the bank and demand a half an ounce of gold? Well, the bank has its own regulations. They say that, well, you have to be an authorized, whatever it is, dealer, a custodian. You have to prove to the regulator or the local authorities that you can take care of it. This, that, the other thing, transporting gold, whatever. There are local considerations beyond the Sharia consideration. The Sharia consideration is, from the perspective of the Sharia board, we saw that the certificate, in fact, is linked to physical gold. The gold is, in fact, allocated. We sent a group of our, from a subcommittee of our Sharia board to inspect the gold in the vaults. It was there. It was earmarked in exactly the way that the custodian told us it would be. So the indicia are there. There is the paper. The physical gold is allocated actually in the name through a number, an inventory system. But there are other circumstances which prevent the owner from actually picking it up unless there's a huge quantity or unless they are themselves a licensed custodian or whatever the case may be. So the Sharia board, when it looks at assets being securitized, we, of course, want to know that, all right, the people, the investors, the holders of the Sukkuk certificates are actually taking title to the assets. And so we look at the indicia. What are the indicators that would lead us to believe that? And there, every deal is unique. Every kind of assets have their own. But when these questions come to courts, then that may be another question. That may be another matter. The courts may look at it differently. In some cases, the court may say that the holders of the Sukkuk are, in fact, and especially in an insolvency case, the judge would actually be doing a favor to, or so you're thinking, doing a favor to the certificate holders by saying, well, I'm going to treat you as debtors, as creditors, rather than holders of equity, because that will put you up to the head of the line when it comes time to collect, and you won't be back there. So